Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS. So we're back into our classrooms and we're back with our important articles from the newspaper where we break them down for our examination perspective understanding. So let's take up today's articles for discussion. The important articles which appear in the New Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper are on our screens, and let's take up the first article for the day. The first article which appears in the newspaper reads, "Geopolitics without geo-economics is a fool's errand." Right? So let's make sense of this headline and this article. What this article is appearing in the editorial section in the newspaper saying is that geopolitics, as we know, is the art of managing a country's strategic interests. So doing geopolitics without geo-economics, without indulging into trade with other countries effectively, is not a right strategy or is a fool's errand. Errand generally means a job or a task. So therefore, indulging into geopolitics and not effectively indulging into geo-economics in the region is what the author feels that this is not the right combination or the right way to go. So why is this headline coming? What is the reason behind writing this article by the author? So what is happening is that we know that the Indo-Pacific region has become a big theater wherein not just the Asian and Southeast Asian countries but other countries, the Western powers have also come over here. They are indulging and playing their power tactics over here. So we are aware of that as to how important this Indo-Pacific region has become. In that same aspect, there are certain regional blocks, security blocks or agreements which are being carried out, and there are also certain trade agreements between various countries that are carried out. So which are these security blocks that are there? So blocks such as Quad, AUKUS, these are some of the organizations that are being formed from the strategic importance point of view. And which are those organizations which are coming in from the trade point of view? So we know this example of RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, right? This was the partnership agreement that was signed between China and other ASEAN nations from which India had stayed away from. And the other economic agreement that was signed recently was the IPEF. What is this IPEF? So IPEF, or the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, this was basically the US's initiative to get into this region and indulge with the other countries of Asia and Southeast Asia in a trade relation manner. So this was the new agreement that is being signed. India has also entered into this agreement but has stayed away from the trade aspect of this agreement. So this is where the author starts from, saying that India is indulging into organizations or agreements which are there from the strategic importance point of view, such as Quad or other organizations, but it is not effectively indulging into these multilateral trade organizations, be that RCEP agreement or the trade aspect of the IPEF agreement. This is where the author tries to start his argument from, that India furthering its strategic interests is good, but not aligning with the economic interests and not making use of the economic potential that exists in this Asian world order is not the right step to do. Right? So first let's understand what IPEF is, and then the author goes on to mention the reasons as to why India not indulging into IPEF and other such multilateral economic agreements is a bad idea. So what is IPEF? For those of us who don't know, IPEF was the recently US-led initiative to further trade between the Asian and Southeastern Asian countries that aims to strengthen economic partnership among participating countries to enhance resilience, sustainability, inclusiveness, economic growth, fairness and competitiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. Basically, if we break these words down into simpler words, what this meant was US wanted to counter China and build a parallel supply chain system which could defy China, and that is why the need arose to make such an initiative, or the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. This was launched in 2021 with a dozen initial partners who together represent 40% of the world GDP. So who are the members in this partnership right now? India, along with 13 other countries located in the Pacific Ocean, are its members, along with Australia, Brunei, Fiji, India, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, United States and the Vietnam. These are the 14 countries which are part of the IPEF right now. And what is the objective of this IPEF? So this, it is not a free trade agreement, but it is a grouping which is coming together to facilitate trade amongst them. So they have mainly 4 pillars of their partnership. What are these 4 pillars? First is the supply chain resilience, which obviously means that all of these countries would be working together to make supply chain, parallel supply chains, which are not necessarily dependent on China or other such countries, and these kind of alternate mechanisms are in place for these countries. Then the next pillar is clean energy, decarbonization and infrastructure. All the member countries would be working on clean energy systems. Then taxation and anti-corruption, wherein this pillar would entail making such provisions which take care of taxation between the trade between the two countries and take care of the anti-corruption measure. So India is signed and taking part in all these 3 pillars. The part in which it is not taking part is the fair and resilient trade aspect, right? So this became the most important point in this framework, wherein the whole point of this initiative coming together was to facilitate trade between the nations, and this vital aspect is where India is not indulging. Now India has a lot of reasons for it. Gave certain reasons to not join the RCEP as well, and then it also gave certain reasons to not join the trade aspect of the Indo-Pacific economic framework as well. The reason that Indian government gives, or what comes from them, is that currently they do not think that the Indian economy is robust enough to stand on its own, and if we allow the entry or participation of other countries and their companies to come into India, it might happen that they might establish monopoly in the market and it might harm the domestic industries. This was the example of dairy industry that was given when India opted to stay out of the RCEP agreement, thinking that the dairy companies from New Zealand and Australia, which were a part of RCEP, might enter into India and might hamper the domestic dairy production in India. So this is the line of reasoning that India follows for largely staying out of these multilateral institutions or trade pacts. But the author feels that India staying out of these pacts has certain disadvantages. And what are these issues that the author feels that by staying out of these agreements, what is India facing as a loss or as a disadvantage? So there are several reasons that the author cites. First is that where India is absent from any of these agreements, so the absence of the world's 5th largest economy, that is India, from various regional trading platforms will invariably do what? Boost China's geo-economic hegemony in Asia. This is what will happen as a consequence, where if China is there in all these agreements and India stays out of it, what it will result into is the geo-economic hegemony of China in this region. Then second, what the author says is that it would be hard to integrate itself into the regional and global supply chains without being a part of the important regional multilateral trade agreements. This is also one important reason where if the author feels or if the government is thinking that we cannot enter into these agreements because we are not resilient enough yet, but by not entering, India denies itself a chance more further to not let itself integrate into the regional supply chain, and which is why again works against India, works against the favor of India. Then he says that we have no option but to address some of the deeper challenges plaguing the investment and business environment in India. So the author acknowledges that the reason why India is not able to participate in these multilateral trade institutions is that India itself faces certain internal challenges and it needs to take care of them. So how is this working out for India? After the pandemic and between when the Cold War between US and China was panning out and certain economic policies from China were not sounding very favorable to the firms or companies which were investing in China, and the reason why companies went into China to support China's economic boom was the cheap labor cost. And with time, what started to happen? The labor cost in China itself started to rise. Now this was an opportunity for India, wherein the shifting of these firms with respect to cheap labor cost, they should have come to India, but that did not happen. What actually started to happen was, apart from going to India, these companies and firms started to go to different countries such as that of Vietnam. So even this advantage India could not take up. Then the author feels that if India is indeed serious about its maritime grand strategy, which cannot be solely military in nature, it needs to get the states in the region to create economic stakes in India, something that China has done cleverly and consistently. This is also a backdrop point that the author feels, is that this is why it is important for India to indulge in the region, not just in a military way, but also in a way where it has economic ties with most of the countries. Then this is what the author feels, that yet another impact of India's hesitation about joining regional multilateral trading arrangements is its potential regional economic isolation. This is also a very grave concern that comes out, that if India stays away from these international trade arrangements, what will happen is that it will increasingly start being regionally economically isolated. This is what the author fears, that these are all the dangers that are associated by India not participating in the multilateral economic arrangements effectively. So how is India operating right now? Currently, India participates with these countries in their aspect of trade via bilateral trade agreements. So it generally has arrangements with these countries in a bilateral trade arrangement way, but it is not indulging in a multilateral trade arrangement way. So the whole argument is in the article, the author tries to make this case that India should be making itself capable to indulge and engage itself in with these multilateral trade arrangements, right? So this was a discussion on this article, and with this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, "A not so clean bill of health." Now this is an important data point which appears in the newspaper, which highlights the recent report that has come out, which is known as the National Health Accounts 2018-19. This is the recent report that has come out, which throws light on a very important aspect of the health sector, which we call the out-of-pocket expenditure, right? We'll understand what out-of-pocket health expenditure is. So this report makes important findings on this particular aspect and the status of government spending and private spending in the sector of health. So this report was produced by the National Health System Resource Center, designated as the National Health Accounts Technical Secretariat in 2014 by the Health Ministry. So essentially the Health Ministry has brought out this report. So what does this report say? Like I said, it talks about the important concept of out-of-pocket expenditure. What is this? What does out-of-pocket expenditure mean? Whenever we spend on our health activities, so whenever we buy medicines or go to the hospital and pay for the hospital charges, if any person is paying the money out of his own pocket and the government is not supporting him, that kind of expenditure is known as out-of-pocket expenditure. So all of us, most of us would agree that major expenditure by Indians in the sector of health is out of their own pocket. So the out-of-pocket expenditure in India with respect to health is very high, and that is what the report has shown, that Indians are spending half their expenses in health, and therefore the out-of-pocket expenditure with respect to health expenses is more than 50% in India, and this is a significantly high number, where in comparison to most other developing and developed nation, this percentage is way lesser. Then the report also says that share of Indians in this out-of-pocket expenditure is highest in India, right? So highest in the world. And with respect to that, share of government in health expenditure. So how much is government spending in the health sector? that is come out to be one of the lowest in the world. That is the stark reality that we are seeing right now with respect to how much money that is being spent in health sector and who is spending it. So the revealing information from this report that is coming in that majority of the expenses that are borne with respect to health expenses are borne by the public themselves, and that is why the out of pocket expenditure in India is very high, and at the same time government's expenditure or the spending of government in this particular sector is very minimal with respect to the world. And another problem which the report highlights is that since health is a state subject, which means that each state is responsible for establishing the health sector infrastructure in their own state, and therefore funding has largely been stagnant in mostly all states, wherein in around 9 states the out of pocket expenditure is above 50%, right, wherein majority of the out of pocket expenditure is being done by the public themselves, and in 17 states government spending per capita is lower than rupees 2000. What this means is that in 17 states, state governments are spending less than 2000 rupees on each person in the state with respect to their health. So this is the dismal state with respect to the funding and spending of money on the health expenditure by state governments and cumulatively as well. So this becomes an important data point for us to know as to why is the public sector with respect to public health sector in India failing, and what is the problem with it. And why does this become significant, wherein we are seeing that one of its most important findings is that government spending as a proportion of the country's GDP went down to 1.28% from 1.35% in the previous year. So any which way, when we talk about government spending on public health expenditure, that the target the government had kept under its national health policy was to spend 2.5% of the GDP on health. And what is the figure coming out to be? Last year it was 1.28% from 1.35%. This is where the public spending or the government spending on health has come down to. So these are the important findings that are coming out from the report, which we can make a note of, and whenever an issue related to the health expenditure comes in or the status of public health sector comes in, we can cite these data. Apart from this, what are the other issues that ails the health sector of India? So there are a host of issues. The other issues are lack of primary healthcare services. This is one major problem, wherein at the level of tier 3 cities, the rural villages, the facilities for primary healthcare is not that adequate, and we all often keep hearing the problems about the Anganwadi workers, the Asha workers who do not have adequate either pay support or the infrastructure to take care of the healthcare services in these areas. So this is a major issue. Then there are supply side deficiencies, wherein all the things that are required are such as the health management, though these health management skills are very poor, and there are lack of appropriate training and supportive supervision for health workers which prevent delivery of the desired quality of health services. So there are supply side deficiencies as well, and then as we saw this point, there is inadequate funding from the government, where government is not spending enough money as it should or as it itself has pledged to do. 2.5% of the GDP health spending, that itself is not happening. The other issue is of overlapping jurisdiction. This also we saw, wherein since health becomes a state subject and it is also deliberated at a national level, there is often no single authority responsible for public health that is legally empowered to issue guidelines and enforce compliance of the health standards. And the last one is the suboptimal public health system, right? This we saw, wherein not just the primary healthcare centers but the whole system with respect to health infrastructure is quite outdated and it's not up to the mark. And due to this, it is challenging to tackle the non-communicable diseases. The burden of non-communicable diseases is increasingly, rapidly increasing in India, which is all about prevention and early detection. It diminishes preparedness and effective management for new and emerging threats such as the pandemic like COVID, where we saw the advent of COVID failing the citizens of India, and how the health infrastructure in India crumbled at this time. And the other problem is very well known, where there are less than required doctors. The adequacy of number of doctors that are there is very low, where India currently has one doctor over the population of 1,445 against the WHO norm of 1:1000. So this is the other problem which is there, where the number of doctors that are required to treat the patients are also not in a sufficient number. So these are the issues that are plaguing the health sector, which the one aspect of which this report highlights. And what is important now is that government is taking efforts through the schemes of Ayushman Bharat and other schemes. It is increasing its spending, but what needs to be done is more public expenditure needs to be made in the sector of health, right? So with this we finish our discussion on this article, and let's move on to the next article. The next article which appears in the news reads, "The process of inclusion or exclusion from the scheduled tribes list." Now this is an article which appears in the newspaper, the context of which we had covered in our previous sessions as well. So what has happened? Certain new communities have been added to the scheduled tribe list. What are these communities? So the Hatti tribe in the Transgiri area of Himachal Pradesh, the Narikovaran and the Kurivikaran hill tribes of Tamil Nadu are added to the scheduled tribes list of Tamil Nadu, and the Binjia tribe in Chhattisgarh, which was listed as a scheduled tribe in Jharkhand and Odisha but not in Chhattisgarh, has now been added to the scheduled tribe list of Chhattisgarh. So now the question which arises over here is, how does one decide which community gets added to the scheduled tribe list? How does it get added? What is the criteria for adding them? Who is the body which is responsible for adding their names into the scheduled tribe list? All these are vital questions which become important for us from the examination point of view. So this is what the article deals with as well. So let's understand about the scheduled tribes in India. Now first of all, when we talk about scheduled tribes in India, India has one of the largest and diverse tribal populations in the world, wherein according to the census of 2011, the number of tribal population is said to be around 104 million, which certainly has now increased, and they make up close to 8.6% of the total population. So a tenth of the total population of the country can be said to be tribal population, and therefore their governance, the provisions for their welfare become of utmost importance. So what about the scheduled tribe? So these scheduled tribes, their inclusion or exclusion into the scheduled tribe list is basically governed by the laws of the country, which primarily flows from the constitution first, wherein the constitution mentions the word scheduled tribes in the article 366 clause 25. This is the article which first mentions the word scheduled tribes, defined as those tribes or tribal communities or parts or groups within such tribes or tribal communities are deemed under article 342 to be scheduled tribes for the purposes of this constitution. And then article 342 of the constitution is the article which prescribes the procedure to be followed in the matter of specification of scheduled tribes. So what did we see? What was article 342? Article 342 became the primary article which gave the authority to those bodies as to who would be responsible for designating who would be the scheduled tribes in various states. So on whom does the power rest with respect to designating, adding or subtracting the names on this scheduled tribe list? It rests with the president. President is that body who is responsible for deciding which community's name should be included or excluded from the list of the scheduled tribes. So president is the ultimate body which gives the assent to include or exclude a name. So the president may, with respect to any state or union territory. So this also means that each state has its different scheduled tribe list. Since the scheduled tribe population is distributed very unevenly, and one state might be consisting of some other scheduled tribe which other state might not, and that is why every state has its own separate scheduled tribe list, and who decides upon them? President is the ultimate body. And we saw that there is a procedure through which it goes to the president. And what is this procedure that the article highlights is that how does it get decided as to who will, which community should be added to the list. So this process to include tribes in the ST list first begins with the recommendation from the respective state governments. So these state governments are the first point of contact where they initiate the recommendations of the names, and this are then sent to the Tribal Affairs Ministry at the center, which reviews and sends them to the Registrar General of India for approval. So there are a lot of players which come in to whom these names are sent, and they also review their recommendations. And this is then followed by the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes approval before the list is sent to the cabinet for a final decision. This is what the news was also about, that the cabinet took the decision to include these tribes under the scheduled tribes list. So this is the whole procedure that is followed, where the names first originate from the state government, then various body review it, then it finally goes to the center, and then ultimately the president will be giving its assent to include or exclude the names from this list. And to establish what is the criteria for such a community being included in this list or not, so to establish whether a community is a scheduled tribe, the government looks at several criteria, including its ethnological traits, traditional characteristics, distinctive culture, geographical isolation and backwardness. All of these become the parameters for deciding which community can be designated as the scheduled tribe under the scheduled tribe list. So these are the criteria that is followed with respect to designating any community or tribe as the scheduled tribe. And what benefits do they get once any community is included in the scheduled tribe list? All the benefits that are mentioned under them in the constitution, such as getting reservation or getting certain specialized services for them, become available for them, right? So this was our discussion on this article, and with this let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, net direct tax kitty cross rupees 7 lakh crore. Now this is a news coming in from the economy side, which gives us the information that about the direct tax collection. And what does it say? That the net direct tax collection as on 17th September 2002, which means this year's tax collection, stood at more than 7 lakh crore. And as compared to the last year figure of September 17, 2021, it was around 5,68,000 crore. So as we can see, there has been a manifold increase in the collection of direct tax, where last year it was to the tune of 5 lakh crore, and this year it has reached to 7 lakh crore. So what does this show? That the problems of tax collection which we often face, that there has been a improvement in it, and the collections with respect to direct tax has improved for the government. And out of these, what are the various proportions that the various taxes have contributed? So corporate taxes constituted little over a half at rupees 3,68,484 crores. So majority of the taxes are being given by the corporate tax, and the personal income tax and the securities transaction tax have yielded rupees 3.3 lakh crore. Now what are these all these names? Corporate tax, income tax, securities transaction tax. What exactly is meant by direct tax? So we'll try to take a look at and understand all these concepts with respect to direct tax and their allied things, which become important for us from the examination. So what is direct tax? When we talk about direct tax, what exactly do we mean by direct tax? Now, direct tax is that kind of a tax which is collected directly from the tax giver. Whenever the tax giver is directly contributing money to the state exchequer, that kind of a levy of a tax is known as a direct tax. That is why, let's say if a person is working anywhere and he earns a certain income, and a part of that income the government charges as tax, which we call income tax or personal income tax, that becomes a direct tax. And what we give whenever we buy a product and there's a hidden or the allied tax attached to it, which we call the GST. This GST becomes an example of indirect tax because the buyer is not directly paying the tax. So this is the direct tax income that we are seeing. And what are then the different types of direct taxes that exists in the economy? So let's take a look at them. When we talk about direct tax, what are the different types of direct taxes? First is the income tax, the obvious example that we saw, wherein all the people who are working at a job and they're earning a specific income above from a threshold income that the government has decided. If they're earning above that, they would have to pay a income tax. And this income from all sources is combined together and taxed according to the individual's income tax slabs, which means that the various slabs of individuals earning a certain level of income, the taxes applied to them also vary accordingly. So that is the nature of income tax. Then what we saw, a name called corporation tax or corporate tax. The name that we saw that this was contributing to most of the collections of the direct tax. What do we mean by corporate tax? It is similar to income tax, where if income tax was levied on people or persons working, this is levied on the companies that are running in the economy, and it is levied on the profit that is earned by them. So it is levied on a firm's profit by the government. This is what is known as corporate tax. It is taxed on operating earnings after expenses have been deducted. And the rate of corporate tax in India varies from one type of company to another. So even the corporate tax rates differ in India depending on the slabs that are put forth by the government in this arena. Then the next kind of direct tax is the dividend distribution tax. Now what do we mean by dividend distribution tax? Dividend refers to the distribution of profits to shareholders of a company. So whenever a company is set up, there are many shareholders of that company, and whenever a company either makes a profit or faces a loss, whatsoever be the performance of the company, if they earn a profit, the shareholders also have an equal right of receiving a share of that profit. This profit is known as dividend. And the dividend distribution tax means that it is a type of tax that is payable on the dividends offered to its shareholder by the corporation. So whenever this company or firm offers a dividend to its shareholders, whatever dividend it is offering, a part of that dividend would be taxed by the government, and that is known as the dividend distribution tax. So higher dividends would mean a greater tax burden for the corporate entity, and this dividend distribution tax, in the budget of 2020, the finance minister had abolished this dividend distribution tax, and now the incidence of dividend income taxation is shifted to investors from the companies. So this tax has also been abolished, and we should remember that. Then one important tax is the minimum alternate tax. Now what is this minimum alternate tax? A lot of times in the economy, we see that there are certain schemes which are there for companies to facilitate their manufacturing process or their business process. So if any company, with the usage of such schemes that are provided by the government, manages to run their business, and it so happens that they sometimes do not have to pay any amount of profit. So the government saw that this is a problem where the company is earning a lot of profit, but it does not have to pay any amount of tax by virtue of its utilizing all of these schemes. So a specific tax was introduced for them, known as the minimum alternate tax, wherein we saw that at times it may happen that a taxpayer, being a company, may have generated income during the year, but by taking the advantage of various provisions of the income tax law, it may have reduced its tax liability or may not have paid any tax at all. And to counter these companies' activities, a certain amount of minimum tax is levied upon them, and this is known as the minimum alternate tax, right? Then the last is of the security transaction tax, which we also saw mention of. What do we mean by security transaction tax? This is a very simple tax where anyone who trades with securities in the economy. So it's a tax that is charged on the purchase and sale of securities that are listed on the recognized stock exchanges in India. So these are the different types of direct taxes that exist which we should know about, and the important information is that the collections with respect to direct tax have increased. So this was our discussion today on the important articles from the newspaper, and we'll meet again tomorrow with the important articles. Thank you.